Hey guys, I just wanted to make a video for a Fire Mage guide since I haven't updated mine in a while. There have been relevant gameplay changes that people should be aware of, so figured it's a good time. Just to start off, you might be asking, well, why would I play Fire? And basically, what I'm going to tell you is that simply Fire is not as bad as people think it is. Um, so I'm just showing you a log right now. This is like Plexus Sentinel where I'm playing Fire. I'm not receiving any PIs or anything like that. I'm top DPS. You go to Soulbinder, like, I'm decently high up there. This is overall, but if you look at like boss damage, I'm destroying boss damage, right? You look at Lumathar, probably the same similar story. Yeah, like I could have played a bit better, could have been a bit higher, right? And this continues on to even like single target. This is our Fractalus. I'm doing similar to Elemental Shamans on their 99, right? Once again, no externals. If you receive externals, it's stronger. Because, fire gets more from externals than most classes, so it's like net more DPS. So basically, all I'm trying to say is it's not bad at all. Now, is it arcane on Nexus King? On overall, it might look similar, but the thing is, like, especially if you look at like boss damage, it looks pretty similar. Um, but then like the platforms obviously are pretty, like you're gonna carry a lot more as arcane on Nexus King. But for the most part, fire is not bad. Anyway, how do we actually play this spec? So I have a little diagram here, and we're going to go into things a little bit with this in front of us, just so we can kind of orient ourselves relative to the rotation. So to start off, how do we actually think about the spec? The way I recommend thinking about the spec is this. We want to split our combat rotation into separate phases. And the reason that's valuable is because the rules that we're going to use to decide the rotation does change based on the phase. And on top of that, just the way you approach it, if you think of it in these separate phases, then you only need to think about specific rule sets in each phase, as opposed to like this overall fluid rotation with extra steps that might not have all its steps relevant in each phase. Feel free to think of it in a different way. This is just how I like to think of it. So obviously, the first main phase is our combustion, right? This one is what we've been playing the whole time basically, and it's pretty useful. So our combustion rotation is actually quite simple. It's pretty much similar to what we've been in the past, where effectively you're following a rotation of like you want to be generating your pyroblast as much as possible in combustion, and so the way we do that best is by using fireblast, which I'll call IB. And then the second most valuable thing is PF, and then the third most valuable thing is Scorch, right? Now, PF and Scorch are both a GCD. Scorch has a cast time, PF has an instant cast, but they both require one GCD to cast. So effectively, the value between this one and this one is basically just that PF does more damage. Now, there is like a 1.5 point here, like in between 1 and 2, which is basically just casting Scorch if you have Heat Shimmer. But you also only do this when improved Scorch is either down or it's like expiring within like 4 seconds, because we don't want to cast it too aggressively. So if like improved Scorch is under 4 seconds. Yeah, or technically it's 4 GCD, but we'll call it seconds. It's basically just a priority, and you're just gonna go down this where it's just always a Pyroblast, and then you pick the highest one here in this order, right? So Pyroblast, Fireblast, Pyroblast, Fireblast, Pyroblast, Fireblast. Once you're pretty much out of Fireblast, you're gonna move on. However, there is a bit of nuance here that I'm skipping. And this is a little bit more for experienced players, but I do recommend learning it, just even if you're not super experienced, because it's good to have in the back of your mind. So the rule is actually a bit more intricate, whereas I say IB if like you want to have a bit more charges, right? So not just always, but specifically if you have like more than 1.5 charges or glorious incandescence. Okay? This is actually the rule. And why do we do this? Like, what is the actual point? This is important because this applies to actually many of our phases, so this is something you really want to drill into your mind. What is the relevance of this rule, right? The rule is this. When you have Glorious Incandescence, spending an IB gives you multiple IBs back. The amount of IBs you get back is relative to your haste and whether you're in combustion or not, thanks to a talent called Fiery Rush, where it reduces the cooldown of IB in combust. GI gives you a flat amount. So it's like if the cooldown of combust If the cooldown of IB in Combust is shorter because you're in Combust, then you're going to get more IBs relatively, right? So the value of thinking about GI is the fact that it would really suck if you have GI and you don't have IBs to spend it. Because if you don't have IBs, but you have GI, who cares that you have GI? Like, you can't spend it, so you're kind of delaying, right? And the really doomer situation that we want to avoid is where you have GI, no IBs, and combustion is ending in 2 seconds. Because the alternative scenario is if you did have an IB, then you'd be able to spend the IB, consume the GI, and then the GI would give you 2 more IBs back. So now you can spend those IBs in the combustion right before it ends. So effectively, by having one spare IB ready for GI, you're guaranteeing that you're always going to have 2 IBs instantly as soon as you consume the GI, and you get to consume the GI as soon as you get it. And the value of that is simply just like if you're in this part of the combustion, if you get a GI, it's not wasted, right? You're always going to be guaranteed. If you ignore this rule, sometimes you'll have it up by coincidence, and sometimes you don't. And if you don't, that really sucks because IBs in combustion are really, really OP and what dictates how much damage you do. Like, that's the number one thing that's going to contribute to damage in combustion is just purely how many IBs can we spend in combustion. Because that equals how many pyroblasts we cast in combustion. Right? Um, yeah. So really try and drill this into your mind of this priority system between like IB, PF, and Scorch. IB being the most valuable, but try to introduce a bit more nuance where we say IB is not just press it willy-nilly, but press it if you have 1.5 charges or more, or you have Glorious Incandescence. So even if you have 1 charge, but you have GI, then you can just press the IB, because you're going to get the IB ASAP, or you're going to get the IBs back from GI ASAP, right? That's great. Now, that's pretty much your combustion phase. There is a bit of nuance to talk about like how you enter combustion, because sometimes people find it a little bit awkward. So the best thing to say is just we want to minimize downtime. And so we do this by really like playing around like how our spells travel. Really there's like 2 main ways, and this is pretty minor, but like it smooths out the rotation a little bit. So I like to think of it as like heating up entry versus non-heating up entry. Um, and it's actually pretty like, it's just one or the other, right? So a heating up entry is very basic. Basically, it's if you have a heating up available to you already and you're about to start your precast for combustion. The entry is just you press combustion and then you convert the heating up to a hot streak with an IB, a fire blast. And then that means you're going to be casting with a hot streak. So then you're going to spend the hot streak right after the cast, right? So it's something like Scorch, IB, Pyro, Pyro. Or Fireball, IB, Pyro, Pyro. Whichever one you prefer. It doesn't actually make a difference. You can cast either one. I'll just put a Fireball for now, but yeah. It's pretty basic, right? Um, the key to understanding why this works is like if you have a heating up already and then you press this IB, now you're casting a fireball with a hot streak that you've attained from pressing this IB. So casting a fireball plus having hot streak means you can press the pyroblast hot streak as soon as fireball ends. And then because fireball will crit and the hot streak you just fired off crits, that's 2 crits, 1 more pyroblast. And this will always happen. Okay? Non-heating up, I'll just call this like NHU, is similar, but we're going to do 1 extra cast. Because if you don't have a heating up, we want to get a heating up, right? And so the way we get that heating up is funnily enough with a fireball. So you can kind of think of it as like fireball. Actually, let me put a combustion here. Fireball combust, and then you would do like fireball IB pyro pyro, right? So it's kind of like doing the precast to get a heating up. Right? To like mimic the top one. The problem is, why would we cast Fireball in Combustion? That seems a bit weird, right? Oh, that looks terrible. And the answer is you don't. You actually wouldn't cast a... Oh, damn. You wouldn't cast a Fireball in Combust. You'd actually just cast a Scorch instead. Right? So this one would actually be a Scorch, not a Fireball. So when you put that all together, it's actually saying Fireball Combust, Scorch IB Pyro Pyro. Do you see how that like kind of parallels the first heating up entry? Now there's other versions you can do as well. For example, you can always do a fireball, combust, PF, pyro, right? If you don't have a heating up. Because what you can also do is with this, if you don't have a heat jump, by combusting here and then just pressing the PF, this pyro is being generated from the fireball and the PF. You need to wait for both of them to land. This is actually also your opener, funnily enough. So I can draw a little arrow here just to indicate this. This is how you do your opener, because obviously in your opener you don't have a heating up. Now, it's worth noting that you could also do the opener as just like precast a pyro into a PF, so that you either get a heating up at minimum or maybe a hot streak, and then you can do a heating up entry, right? Obviously you can do a hot streak entry where it's just like you don't even need the IB, right? You just fireball, combust, pyro, pyro. But that's how you enter combust. Um, I believe that covers everything about combustion. I don't think there's anything else. So now we can move on to hyperthermia phase. How do we think about hyperthermia? Now, hyperthermia is actually very basic. You're always going to be pressing pyroblast, 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 right? But we want to intersperse our IBs in there for a couple of reasons. It's important to note that like a hot streak pyro is different than a heating up pyro, or like a non-hot streak pyro really. A hot streak pyro is different than a non-hot streak pyro because hot streak does something more than just making the pyro instant cast. That little bit more that people don't realize is that hot streak says makes your next pyroblast instant cast and increases the damage of the ignite contribution by 100%. So that is to say, if you pyroblast and it would normally do like 10k damage from ignite, if it was a hot streak pyroblast, it will do 20k damage from ignite, right? So there's extra value behind the hot streak pyro. Now, if we're going to be casting the set amount of IBs that we do in an entire fight, like the amount of IBs you press they're going to be the same no matter what, right? As long as you don't overcap, then we want to kind of put our IBs where it's most optimal, right? It's kind of like spreading them out and placing them where it's most optimal. Obviously in combustion, that's where it's most optimal. So that's why we've prioritized pressing IBs in combustion as much as possible. And there's going to be a little bit more on this when we get to the filler. But the next most optimal space is actually during hyperthermia, because hyperthermia pyroblasts are increased in damage. Because the way hyperthermia is, every time you press a pyro, the next pyro is stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger until the hyperthermia ends. But also, hyperthermia makes all the pyros crit. So effectively, a hyperthermia pyro and a combustion pyro is actually very similar. The only difference is combustion has a flat percent increased modifier from Unleashed Inferno, whereas hyperthermia is a ramping one. There will be a point technically where your pyros in hyperthermia just do more damage than your pyros in combust, right? So pressing IBs here could be more beneficial. Now there's a bit of nuance because IBs also give CDR thanks to Unleashed Inferno, etc., etc. But at least damage-wise, a hyperthermia is very, very valuable still. So we want to press IBs in hyperthermia still. How do we do this though? There is actually a way to do this specifically. Now we actually adopt the rule from combustion where we press IBs based on one of these rules. You either just press them willy-nilly or you press them in accordance to this more nuanced rule. But we want to press them in a way where you only have heating up at the time that you press them, because our goal is to get hot streak. So if you press them while you have hot streak, then it's just a waste, right? Like you're not doing anything special with that IB. So we actually want to press them during heating up. Now, how do we do this and how do we distinguish this? In hyperthermia, I find that like it's actually pretty hard because of the fact that like you're reacting to travel time of your pyroblast landing, and that's going to change based on your distance from the boss. But on top of this, you're just constantly casting pyroblast, so sometimes you get in this like groove where you like kind of lose yourself, right? So instead of saying press IB when you have heating up in hyperthermia, I'm going to say something that is functionally the same, but like conceptually a little different, which is to say press IB after a hot streak pyro in hyperthermia. It's the same because after a hot streak pyro, you're always going to have a heating up. The difference is you're not reacting to the heating up, you're just predicting it coming. And that really makes things a lot smoother, and that's something that I really, really recommend you think about, instead of just saying like, oh, I'm going to press it with the heating up. So IB if 1.5 or GI on, here, let me bracket this so it looks a little clearer, on heating up only. Okay? And a different way to think of this is after hot streak pyro. And I'll make this a little different color just so it's a little bit more clear. There we go. Hopefully that makes sense. That's basically it for hyperthermia. There is this one really, really small rule that basically, like, at the very end of hyperthermia, you can dump the IBs a little bit aggressively to use up all your IBs. But the thing is, not doing this is like a 0.2% loss, which is really small. So it's kind of like whatever. To give you an idea, doing it this method, where it's like the dumb way, is 0.5%, or no, it's actually like 1% or something. I forget the number. Worse than doing it the more nuanced way. But dumping your IBs at the end of hyperthermia is like such a small percentage of that like doing it this way is actually just more beneficial. So like, you know, pick our battles here. I try to dump at the end of hyperthermia, but I don't always do so if it doesn't feel comfortable. If I feel like I might be lost and not able to fit it, I just ignore the end of it and I just like press it in accordance with this rule only, and that's completely okay. All right. Now, once you finish your hyperthermia phase, now you go into your filler phase. And this is kind of like where it's not really worth a super amount, but smoothing it out really makes it really valuable and just better. You just play more confident. So it's really valuable to learn the filler phase. So in your filler phase, your goal is actually pretty simple. It's generate pyros when you can without using too many resources. And you're basically just waiting for a combustion. This is distinct from thinking of it as you're pressing resources to get combustion back. And I'm wording that in a very careful way. I'm not saying you're using resources to get combustion back. Instead, I'm saying it is you're waiting for combustion. It's like a more passive approach. And the reason I word it like that is because there's a noob trap where people spend all their IBs to get combustion back from kindling. But then when they get to combustion again, they don't actually have any fire blast remaining, which is really, really bad because the combustion phase, remember, is the most optimal time to spend our IBs, right? So how do we actually think about this? Well, when you enter filler phase, there's a couple of priorities and things you want to take into account, right? Which is like, for example, 1, do we have shifting power? If we have shifting power, we kind of want to put it on cooldown ASAP. 2, how many PFs? 3, downtime, and like not wasting heat up / hot stream. Okay? So, what does this mean? First of all, shifting power is a cooldown, right? We should think of it as a cooldown. We want to press cooldowns as much as possible to get the maximum amount of uses. The cutoff really for when shifting power becomes not worth pressing is around 8 seconds of combustion cooldown. You can err on the side of like 10 seconds if you really want, but don't be like, oh my god, I have 10 seconds, 12 seconds, I don't want to press it because I'm going to waste 1 or 2 seconds of shifting. No, don't do that. Because if you don't press it here, and then you get another combustion phase, what's going to end up happening is you're going to hold it for the entire combustion, the entire hyperthermia phase, and then like whenever you decide to press it in filler, you're going to be holding until that point as well. This is easily like 30 seconds, right? To combustion plus hyperthermia. And so if you're holding for 30 seconds, you're losing half the uses of shifting power, right? Which is just really bad. So we don't want to be too optimal, too efficient or whatever. You want to be able to send it a bit more willy-nilly. So 8 seconds, great. We can press shifting. As for what do we care about shifting power, there's a couple of things that we can think about. Shifting power reduces the cooldown of a couple of things. Mainly it's combustion, IB, and PF, right? Reducing the cooldown of combustion and IB is fantastic. And reducing the cooldown, of PF is actually not that important. And the reason is because the cooldown of shifting power reduction, whatever the amount CDR gives you, is 12 seconds, right? And a PF is actually 25 seconds CD. So let's say it gives us half a charge back. But the thing is, you have so much CDR on PF from other talents, like Phoenix Reborn, near the bottom of the tree, or from the Ashes, I forgot which one it is. But basically, the effective cooldown of PF is really closer to like 6 seconds. So if you're getting half a PF charge back from shifting, but its effective cooldown is 6 seconds, really it's kind of like giving you only 3 seconds of PF cooldown, like effective cooldown. it's basically just think of it as half a charge of PF, which actually is not that worth, right? So holding shifting power until you spend a PF or something like that is kind of a bait. We kind of want to just send it ASAP. Now you might think to yourself, why would I press shifting if I have 2 PF? Can't I just press a PF first and then go into like my shifting afterwards? The answer is yeah, technically you can. The only thing is you have to be careful of like, imagine you fire like a pyroblast and then you're like, or mindlessly you're doing something and then you PF also, and then the pyroblast gave you a hyperthermia. You end up like having to hold the shifting for quite a while. You can just spend the PF first if you really want to, but honestly, it's like really, really minor. That just conceptualizing it as like, I want to press shifting ASAP is completely okay. You're not going to be losing much damage from like having too few PFs. That's just not a thing that happens. Okay? It's pretty minor. So then what about combustion and IB? Now combustion obviously is like great. Combustion CDR, we already talked about 8 seconds. Cool. What about IB? I want to introduce a concept that's like a little bit weird to think about, but it's really true. Shifting power gives us about 2 IB charges back. So a lot of people might think, well, okay, I can press it then when I have 1 IB charge. But that's actually not correct, because if you think of it that way, then your shifting power usage becomes too restricted. You're going to end up holding shifting where you don't need to. Instead of thinking of IB as having a 3 charge maximum, I want you to start thinking of IB as having a 5 charge maximum. The 5 charges being your 3 IB charges, and then also a heating up and a hot streak. Or really, it's like heating up plus heating up, which makes the hot streak. But basically, to say that your hot streak like container has like 2 heating ups, which is equivalent to 2 IBs. So the analogy I'm trying to draw is like if you have 3 IBs but no heating up at all, that's like saying you're 3 out of 5. So you know you can press shifting, and as soon as you press shifting, you're going to press an IB and then press an IB again. And what's going to happen is you're going to regen those 2 IBs and generate a hot streak. So you're not wasting anything, right? The only danger is like technically the first tick of shifting happens instantly, so you'll need to like IB shifting instead of like shifting IB. But you have to be kind of fast with it. But yeah. Alternatively, you can think of it as like, okay, I have 2 IB charges and only heating up. That means you're again 2 plus 1. So 3 out of 5. So if you have 2 IBs and heating up, then you know you're still 3 out of 5, so you have space for 2 more. So you can press shifting, and then just press an IB during the shifting to make the heating up hot streak. And that, like, the moving one of the 2 charges into the container makes it so that you basically have room to generate 2 IBs from shifting. Okay? All this, if this is complicated, all this is trying to say is just you have to realize that there are more situations where you can cast shifting than you might think to begin with. Okay? Where you're not actually wasting heating ups or IBs from pressing shifting too early. Alright? As for the rest of filler phase beyond shifting power, how many PFs? What is the point of this? Using PFs is kind of awkward because PF gives you a heating up, but the thing is, you don't want to cast it like interrupting a cast of fireball or something, right? Like you don't want to cast a fireball, start casting another fireball, realize that the first one crit, interrupt your new fireball, and then cast the PF to get a hot streak. That's really bad because that interrupting of the cast is terrible. Like you're losing way, 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 way more damage doing that way. So it's kind of like, okay, well, then how do we weave in these PFs? And this is where knowing how many PFs you have like helps. I like to think of PF as like an enabler, where you can use a PF to enable something else. And that something else is either like an IB or another PF. Okay? So if you have a 1 PF and 1 IB, you can think of PFing as an enabler for the IB, because you wouldn't want to just press the IB by itself. That would be really awkward, right? So it needs something to like complement it. Usually that's like a heating up from a fireball crit or something. But a PF can also occupy that role. So you can always like, let's say you're just finished casting a pyroblast, like a hot streak pyroblast, in like hyperthermia, right? Like you just crit. So then you can like, or maybe you didn't crit, like you had 1 pyroblast remaining after the heating up, or hyperthermia, sorry. You pyroblast, you don't have a crit anymore. Okay, well, I'm gonna PF IB pyro. Like you can do that. Alternatively, if you have two PFs, you can always PF Pyro, right? But thinking of it in this way is kind of like thinking of things in a vacuum, which doesn't really work. The way you usually want to use your PFs is simply like this. After hyperthermia ends, you're gonna have a heating up, most likely. And if you have a heating up, throw in that PF. Okay? So then this can actually fit in right here. Okay, like right at the precipice of the hyperthermia ending. If you don't have a heating up from hyperthermia, and that would only happen in a world where you actually had a hot streak from hyperthermia, you spent the hot streak and then the pyroblast didn't crit. If you didn't have one, that's where you can throw the PF and then sorry, my mic cut off. Throw the PF and then look to IB. Or if you have shifting power, then you can actually throw the PF and then look to shifting straight away. And then during the shifting, you can press the IB. Okay. Now, what about pressing PFs outside of the initial end of hyperthermia, right, or the start of this? What I like to do most is actually casting it after a fireball when I don't have a heating up. Why do we do this? So let me write down. So put it here. So one, use after HT if heating up, right? Or two, after fireball if no heating up. Now, why do we do this? Why is it important that it's no heating up after the fireball? The reason is simple. If you fireball and you have a heating up and you press a PF afterwards, two bad things. One, what if the fireball crits? And obviously your PF is going to crit, but you already had a heating up. So now you have two crits when you already have a heating up, so you've wasted a heating up. Bad, right? Which kind of goes into number 3. Do not waste heating ups or hot streak. And then the second part is there's actually a bug with PF where if you had a certain range, it's around 10 to 20 yards. I think it even can extend further, depending on some other factors or whatever. But basically the bug is the PF travel time can just become slow for some reason. And what ends up happening is then the PF will land after the fireball lands. And so if you have a heating up, you fireball, and then after the fireball you PF, and the bug happens. The fireball lands first. If it doesn't crit, then you lose the heating up, and then the PF lands, giving you the heating up. So now you've just had a heating up, cast two spells, one of them is a guaranteed crit, and still only have a heating up. That's bad, right? So instead, we actually want to only do it when we don't have a heating up so that that bug doesn't occur. And also, we don't waste potential heating ups from earlier. Now, if you want to do this, you need to keep in mind how many PFs you have, because if you only have one PF, then you'll need to complement this one with an IB. And you don't always want to IB. So this actually moves us on to the next point. When do we use IBs in our filler phase? And this will be the last major point. IB in filler phase is something that we ideally want to avoid unless it's to prevent overcap. Okay? Now why? Remember back at the beginning I was kind of talking about pressing IBs where it's optimal during combustion phase? Or where it's optimal throughout the rotation, and the most optimal time is combustion phase, and then after that, the second most important part is an HT phase. Really, that means that we want to not press it at the worst time possible in the filler phase because we want it to contribute more damage, right? Because you have a set amount of IBs in a fight. It's imagine if IB was a minute cooldown. In a 5-minute fight, you're gonna have 5 IBs no matter where you spend it. Right? So it's kind of the same thing, except it's not a minute, it's a lot shorter cooldown. So we want to still choose where we press it. And usually that's spreading them out through our our high DPS phase. So the number of IBs you press might look something like this. They're very interspersed throughout the filler, but very heavily concentrated through combustion and hyperthermia or whatever, So then how do we actually navigate this? If you want to press IBs, do so early on and stop doing it at the end. That's one way to do it. That's kind of like how the sim does it. I'm not huge on this playstyle, and I'll tell you why in a second. But if you want to do that way, the sim rule is you can press IBs willy-nilly with heating ups in filler until combustion is 15 seconds flat cooldown reduction, like not effective cooldown, but like just the cooldown on the actual tooltip. It says 15 seconds. When it's 15 seconds, you stop pressing IBs no matter what. And that way you pull up enough for the combustion. I don't like that. Why? Because there is such a thing as proccing hyperthermia. If you proc hyperthermia, a hyperthermia proc is similar to a regular hyperthermia. You don't have the 10% haste from the set bonus, but the value of it is actually the same. There is some reason to say that, like, technically if you don't have the haste, you're going to stack up the buff less, so the power of the pyro is like less valuable, so blah blah blah. So technically these are weaker, but still these hyperthermias are stronger than filler. So in a way, pressing IBs and hyperthermia is still actually valuable here, more than filler, just maybe not as valuable as here. But in a ranking, like, this is the most important, this is the second most important, this would be the third most important, and then this would be the fourth, or like the last most important. Right? So what I tend to do instead is to think of using IBs as I'll only press an IB to avoid overcapping in my filler until I am either in combustion or I proc a hyperthermia. If I proc hyperthermia, I'll press it more aggressively. So if I proc one like early on here, I will be slamming those IBs in this hyperthermia, right? The only exception to this is, like, if you want to do this way, be aware that, like, if you proc a hyperthermia here and your combustion is in like 10 seconds, you probably don't want to press IBs, right? Because you want still IBs for combustion, because that's number 1 priority, not number 3 priority, right? So just keep that in mind, okay? But that's generally how I view pressing IBs. So just to kind of like recap the filler, because I know it's complicated and there's a lot of things that people might not be used to. It's usually like this: you exit hyperthermia, you think about whether you're gonna have heating up or nothing after you press your last pyro. If you have heating up, press your PF, get a hot streak, press the hot streak. Do you have shifting power? If yes, cast it ASAP. And then once you've done the shifting power and you've used up your PFs completely, like you've dumped every PF you had and complemented them with IBs if you need to, then you're going to start casting Fireball, Fireball, Fireball. You get into this like Fireball chain. Fireball, Fireball, Fireball. When you crit with a Fireball, you can either decide to IB on it, if you want to do the sim way, where you're just holding until the end, or not holding until the end. Then you can do that. Or you can just do what I'm doing, where it's just keep fireballing. Fireball, 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 Fireball. Do I get a heating up? Do I press IB? No. Why? Like, isn't that bad? Why would I not press an IB on a heating up? I'm letting a heating up die, right? Like, that sounds bad. You're wasting heating ups. You're telling me don't waste heating ups, but now you're telling me you do. The thing is, you're not actually wasting a heating up. Because what you need to think about is not actually the fact that you're losing some heating ups. It's instead that you're actually throwing away an IB. Because the thing is, you're going to have more heating ups throughout the fight than the number of IBs you have throughout the fight. So heating up is like the limiting factor, right? So if heating up is the limiting factor, don't work around heating ups, work around the limiting factor of IB. The analogy is like, if you have 20 slices of cheese and 60 slices of bread, you can still only make 20 cheese sandwiches, right? You're going to have 20 cheese sandwiches and then 10 air sandwiches, right? Like who cares about the air sandwich? I don't care about those pieces of bread. The heating up here is the 60 slices of bread. The IBs are the 20 slices of cheese. The sandwich is the pyroblast, right? You can still only make a set amount of pyroblasts with IB, so it's okay to let heating ups die in this sense, okay? So then you can just press Fireball, 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 Fireball. Do I proc a heating up? Yes. Do I IB? I don't have to, right? If I'm at 2.5 charges, yeah, I'll press one, right? Because I don't want to overcap. But if I'm at like 1 charge, it's okay, let it die. And then eventually you're going to build up IBs enough where it's 2.5 charges, and then if you crit, then you can press it, right? Now, the thing is, you're not even going to get worried about overcapping, because at any point, eventually, after spamming a bunch of fireballs, you get an IB that you want to spend. Congratulations, you probably have a PF that you'll want to spend, because you just got 10 fireballs in a row or something, right? An extra added bonus, by the way, of playing it like the way I'm describing is that if you don't let heating ups potentially die, it also means that you're never going to get a lucky pyroblast from just critting 2 fireballs in a row, right? If you're forcing an IB on every heating up, you're never letting yourself get lucky and just get 2 fireballs crits in a row, right? So there's a bit of like RNG that you're losing out on. Technically, if you IB and then you like the fireball that would have crit if you didn't IB, just procs the heating up after. The loss is if you don't have another IB that you want to press on that one, then it would die. Sometimes you will, and then there's no loss, but it's just getting a bit too theoretical. Just ignore this part if you're too worried about it. The main thing I just want to take away from this is just don't waste IBs too much. Don't think about heating ups and wasting them like from Fireball. Just don't waste heating ups from like PFs is the main thing, because you spent a resource to get this heating up from PF, so you want to actually use the heating up like you spent money on or whatever, you know. Um, so yeah, but make sure you have enough IBs for your combustion to get back into combustion, because you want IBs in combustion. Because look how many you want to spend in combustion, a lot, right? Uh, Typically, a rule of thumb is say like if you're entering a combustion without at least 2 IBs, that's bad, right? You always want 2 or more because you just want as many as possible, right? 2.9 or something would be ideal because you're not wasting any, but you're also entering with max. And keep in mind that if you're gonna IB in the opener, like consider that, right? In the opener of combust, consider that you want to think about it. Like if you have 2.9 but you're gonna press 1, that's great. If you have 2 and you're entering combustion, you're pressing 1 like insta, then maybe that's not too hot. So going to really high amounts of IB is okay. I would rather you overcap IBs for like 2-3 seconds and have as many IBs as possible in combust than going in with too few IBs for combustion. Okay? Yeah. I mean, that's pretty much it. Like, obviously, there's a lot of theory, and I'm sorry if this is complicated. I'm trying to like break this down as much as possible. I know the video is really long, but these are fundamentals that are going to carry on for the rest of Sunfury and even Frostfire Fire. As long as we're playing like Unleashed Inferno, these are going to be so important because there's a lot of micromanagement of things that exists now thanks to the removal of TA, and we don't have like the braces to give us a bunch more of IBs. So this stuff is really valuable to like master. I would highly recommend getting to the habit of learning this so that you can be a god of fire. I am not exaggerating when I'm telling you this is everything that you need to get rank 1 and be the best fire mage that you need to be, or that you can be. If you do this, you can be rank 1 fire mage in the world. Straight up. There's nothing that you need to do beyond this to get that. There's also probably less that you can think about and still get rank 1s. This is just how I think about the fire mage spec, and not to toot my own horn, but I have many rank 1s as fire, and this has always served me well, and it makes my life easy because by thinking in this fashion, when I'm in my filler phase, I only think about these 3 things. I don't give a fuck about this stuff, right? And if I'm in combustion, I don't give a fuck about this stuff. I'm only thinking about like in parts, and the value of playing in parts, for what it's worth, is that once you like kind of recognize that your next 4 GCDs are set in stone, you can use those next 4 seconds to look ahead. So between like this part of your combustion and this part of your combustion, if this is just like your opener and you've already set in stone what those are, during this part you can actually think about what you're doing up until here, right? So then when you reach here, you're not like flustered for what you have to do next. You've already made the decision, right? You've already made, so then during this part, because you've already made the decision here, then you can start thinking about this part. So it carries on forward always. And at any point, if you get a mechanic from like a raid boss or something, if you've already thought about the decision that you're gonna make over here for this part, if you get a mechanic here or here, you don't need to think about the rotation anymore. You've already solved it, right? So then you can do the mechanic and do full DPS at the same time and not make a mistake because you're not trying to do your decision making and the mechanic at the same time. Okay? That kind of thought process of like thinking ahead and putting yourself in a position to think ahead is absolutely key and pivotal to being like really good at WoW. For any spec, any class, anything in the game, thinking ahead and figuring out actually how to do that is the most valuable part of improving as a player. Okay? So I know this is heavy and I know this is rich, and Fire Mage is not some PhD spec. This is just how hard every spec in the game is when you take it to the highest level. I'm just giving you a guide to be a rank 1 player, basically, that other guides might not be, basically. So I know this is a lot and it's daunting. Take it one step at a time. Focus on the basics. Maybe then introduce some more complexity and nuance. really think about this stuff very intentionally. Hit the dummy, question yourself what you're doing all the time. Why, what should my decision be? If you ever lost, go back to this. Figure out what does this ascribe you to do. If you're not sure, you can ask questions in the comments. On my Discord, I am perma chatting on my Discord, like hundreds of messages a day, helping people with logs, reviews, theoretical, conceptual questions. So feel free to post there. Yeah. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I hope this has been helpful. If you've stuck it out this long, you must really love me and my content. Thank you. But yeah, I will see you in the next one.